Welcome to yet another episode of the Reenactors Corner, although this is kind of a late episode. The thing is that I've been too busy with a very big event that happened in Belgium now 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks ago, and this episode was actually recorded before I went to it. So, I'm sorry. Anyways, we have more episodes already recorded that will be out very shortly after this one. So just keep an eye out and enjoy listening to an old chat of ours.
Hey, everybody. Welcome again to our podcast, The Reenactors Corner. I am Chris here with Lassa.
Hello.
We have a special guest today, who is Ben, our friend, who's also a reenactor, and we're going to talk to him about some reenactment-related stuff today.
Awesome. It's an honor to be here. My name is Ben Tracey. And it's my pleasure.
So, Lassa, I guess to kick off the episode, let's do what we like to do and talk about reenactment-related stuff that we've been up to lately. And I don't have that much to talk about today, but I know that you've been getting ready for a big event and working on some exciting equipment that your unit has. So why don't we talk about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can probably go back a few weeks. There was this theater play that was being set up at a coastal fort, and the theater play wanted a German truck, and they contacted us for it, and they were willing to pay a nice price to have it with them. So I spent a week sitting in the hottest sun ever with our 1937 Chevrolet 1.5-ton truck, preparing and driving under the play. It was boring but exciting at the same time. In one of the scenes, we actually dragged a stuntman dressed as a Soviet prisoner of war along the pavement.
That sounds really cool. We do that kind of stuff in America all the time, as you know.
That's dark.
Well, look, you said you've got I guess your Chevrolet truck is from 1937, Lassa?
That is correct.
Where did you guys find that truck?
We found it, there's this website on the Norwegian interwebs that are basically the nationwide main place to sell cars. And that's where we found it after the Normandy event in 2017. We actually bought it just a week and a half after that event, and it's undergone a 1-year-long restoration, and we've had it up and running for since last August, but we've been doing some work on it every now and then. But now, just before the theater play, we actually had we had to do quite a few bits to get it up to scratch for the theater play. And now that we're going to a rather big event in Belgium, we have done and are gonna do some other major pieces on it.
I did have the pleasure of seeing this truck. Was it back? It was last summer, actually, at one of your members' houses, and it had been painted tan then, and it's quite impressive, the restoration job that you guys have done. Really, truly is. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Did you guys have a vehicle before?
No, this is our first one.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
I feel like a truck is maybe like the most useful reenactment vehicle for a unit to have. That's my take, because it's something that like kind of everybody can use and enjoy. You know, people can, not just the driver, but everybody can get a ride. I guess the same thing is true with a half track too, but of course that's a whole other aspect of difficulty and expense.
Yeah, absolutely. when we're talking about buying a vehicle, we were looking into the SD KFZ 222, the leichte Panzerspeerwagen, and because it's easy enough to build yourself, but after the Normandy event, we kind of figured that a truck gives us, it basically gives us more. So we went for that, and we found
Totally.
one, and we just bought it, went for it.
Yeah, because the crew of the 222 is what, 3 people? I don't know off the top
Yeah,
of my
3.
head. And then you can't really have guys riding on top. I mean, or you can't have that many guys riding on top, right? It's an open top turret, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's totally reasonable. That's totally reasonable.
A truck is like a super utilitarian thing too, because there's almost no scenario in which you can't like find a way to use the truck.
I mean, personally, I'm a fan of cars, in particular requisitioned civilian vehicles. But that said, I mean, what is it for? It's somebody's personal transport. You know, it's got a specific purpose. Like, and a truck is for carrying guys, and that's something that a lot of people could benefit from. So,
Yeah, you can tow stuff with a truck
yeah,
too.
yeah, sure.
Yeah,
True.
it's funny you mentioned civilian requisitioned cars, because the German army did not officially have any Chevrolet trucks, because Chevrolet did not have any plans in Europe that were building Chevrolets, as for example Ford did in Köln or Cologne. But the Chevrolet ton and a half from 1936 or 37, they were mass imported into Europe in most of the countries for civilian use, but the Dutch army and the Belgian army, and I do believe to an extent also the Polish army, bought some of them, and they were used by the German army. So I do know that those specific ton and a half trucks were used. And I do have one photo that I believe is from Normandy, where you have a Chevrolet truck. Just it's loaded with trees and like camouflage, and it looks cool as hell. But our truck represents a civilian truck that the German army they looked at it and said, "We need that one," and they sent it off to a mechanics company that just redid a few things for the Wehrmacht specifications.
Now, Lasso, when I saw the vehicle, did you? I feel like you told me that you actually could trace its history back, and it actually had been requisitioned by the Wehrmacht. Am I remembering that incorrectly?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to confirm it, but all leads point to that it was requisitioned by the German army during the war, because it was basically imported to Norway in 1937, and it's been in Norway ever since. But we do not believe that the Germans took it and requisitioned it. It's more like they requisitioned it for a week, maybe for a maneuver or something.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I've seen photos from Norway, wartime images of trucks, not even painted camouflage, but like still with their whatever sort of civilian color paint they had on before the war in service with the Wehrmacht, because, I mean, there really wasn't the need.
Yeah, exactly. And but as we're not portraying a unit station in Norway, but rather in Normandy or the Eastern Front or something, we have redone it to quote unquote Wehrmacht specifications.
What did you guys wind up choosing for the camo pattern?
Well, it has the Dunkelgelb, the dark yellow base, and we are going to do it in a two-pattern turtle pattern, two-tone
Sounds
turtle
cool.
pattern, which is basically green stripes that kind of cross each other's. We're gonna do a few more details that we're gonna paint Dunkelgelb before we actually do the camouflaging, but it's gonna be done within 10 days.
Wow, sounds like a lot of work.
And you guys are bringing it to the event, yeah?
Yeah, so there's an event in Belgium next week. It's called September Odyssey. It's hosted by a large organization who's called the Second Armored in Europe. And they are also the same one who organized the Normandy event, but this time it's in Belgium. It's covering the retreat. I think it's in late August, early September, in the correct dates. And we're basically going to be a German convoy of trucks and cars. We're going to be. I probably shouldn't mention that on the podcast in case some of the Allied are listening. But we're going to be X number of Germans with X number of vehicles. Maybe some armored, maybe not. I'm not going to say anything. And we're going to be followed by, I believe there are up to 250 Americans now in various half-tracks, trucks, and armored cars and tanks.
Sounds like an incredible event.
You better run, Lasse. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I'm jealous.
So the event starts next Friday, but since it's a very old truck, we have to start hitting the road already on Monday to be there in time.
Well, you're driving the truck to Belgium?
Sort of, yes. It's a road legal truck. It handles very well and everything, especially now that we fixed certain issues. But we're basically going to take a boat to Belgium.
You're going to put that truck on a boat?
Yeah.
Well, that's wild.
Sounds like an odyssey, dude.
Yeah.
If you look at a world map, the issue is that Norway is quite separated from the rest of the continental of Europe by lots of water. So there's lots of ferries going around everywhere, but there's none going to Belgium. So what we ended up on choosing was a so-called ro-ro ship, which is a roll-on, roll-off container shipping ship.
So very large, right? Like several hundred meters long, right?
Yeah, it's a huge cargo ship, but it's leaving from Gothenburg. Gothenburg to Oslo is some 300 odd kilometers. I don't really want to risk that, so we ended up getting a ferry to Denmark. Then we're going to drive to another port in Denmark and then take a regular ferry from that port in Denmark to Gothenburg. Then we're going to drive to the shipping area of that port in Gothenburg and take the ship to Ghent in Belgium.
Wow.
Thankfully,
Incredible.
the way back goes directly from Ghent to Norway.
Sounds like a logistical nightmare.
That's fun, isn't it?
It's like the event before the event.
Yeah, very much so. Me and the unit co-commander Nicholas is going to enjoy a very fun ride from Norway to Belgium in a very old truck on a cargo ship filled with Eastern European truck drivers.
Sounds kind of zony. Like you guys are going to have to set up perimeter defense for your truck. You know what I mean?
You were joking about that when we come to Belgium, we don't have a truck anymore. We lost it in a poker game.
That's like the classic like European joke about Eastern Europe, you know? It's like I can think about these jokes.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, and to say the least, I can't wait to hear about how it goes for you. Sounds like a really fun adventure.
That sounds awesome, dude. I'm quite envious. Like, best of luck, Godspeed.
Thank you. I think we ended up with a total amount of kilometers for the trip to Belgium to the meetup location is going to be some 130 kilometers driven.
Wow.
And that is 80 miles.
I hope you guys take a lot of pictures. Sounds really cool.
I do plan on bringing the audio recording and have a special episode with audio from the event.
That'd be awesome.
That would be so cool, dude.
I was thinking we should do like a little bit of like a explanation of who Ben Tracey is for people listening to the podcast who might not know who our guest is.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that.
Do you want to give like a succinct little like rundown of your origin story for these people?
Sure. So my name is Ben Tracey. I'm Ben Longfellow on Facebook. I've been reenacting for.
That's about your dick, right? Just so everybody knows.
No, it's actually my real name. Maybe yes. All right. So I've been reenacting for going on 7 years actually, as of this fall. And I've been through a number of units. My primary unit now is Chris's unit, SR195, based out of New England. And I like to say that reenacting is one of the best and worst decisions I've ever done with my life. Best in terms of experience, worst in terms of horrible financial decisions. But all the wild adventures that I have had in those years and the crazy people that I've met, Chris and Lassa included, have made it totally worth it for me. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Anything else, Chris?
No, that's good. No, you and Lassa actually have met in real life, not just the time that that Lassa came to America and when I met him, but you've done events with Lassa's unit too.
Yeah. Actually, I've had the pleasure of meeting a number of members of Lasse's unit from Norway. I always love to see photos of your events because I get to see everybody's smiling faces again. We met up for the first time. What was it? November of 2017. I was basically studying in Madrid in Spain, and I flew up from Madrid to Oslo, and Lasse was kind enough to show me around. I I came to see Norway in many ways as a reenactor's paradise. I mean, it was just so cool. I thought everybody was very motivated, very enthusiastic, very zony, very authentic, and we did.
Well, you said they were farts. That's what you told me.
Go to hell.
Hey, what?
I kid.
I kid. So yeah, no, that was a good time. We did that really cool event in which, well, we kept watch all night, and the child partisans attacked us. That was a hell of a story. Maybe we can tell that.
Yeah, because
And-
we've done you've done 2 events with my unit
Yeah.
in 2 different years,
Yeah.
2 different locations. One was a little bit south of Oslo.
What was it? Don't tell me. I'm trying to remember. Larvik?
That's correct. Very
Oh, good.
very similar name to the famous Battle of Narvik, but it's Larvik, and it's about 2 days drive further south than Narvik. Then we had another event in the basically the city woods of Oslo, the capital, which is a fun story as well. And
Yeah,
then,
it wasn't far. That was, man.
yeah, and those are the 2 events you've done with the unit. But then you and I and an Austrian and a Czech guy, sounds like a bad joke, went to the Arctic to do a vintage hike, sort of.
That was so much fun. Yeah, on the island of Spitsberg in the
Svalbard,
word of Svalbard. Yeah.
78 degrees north.
Yeah. Yeah. So we hiked from the Russian mining town of Barentsburg back to the capital / the only other settlement there, Longyearbyen. And it took, what is it, 4 nights, 5 days? I don't even want to say nights and days because night and day doesn't exist up there that time of year. It's just sleep cycle.
At the midnight sun.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Well, so for people who are listening who don't know what that was, you guys basically did like a hike that was kind of a trek. It lasted for days, where you were just using and carrying and wearing vintage stuff that was maybe like 1930s, 1940s sort of like stuff, but it wasn't any kind of a specific military or civilian like impression from
Sure.
a reenactment standpoint, right?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
more
that's-
like a civilian, inspired kit.
Sure, that's how I'd characterize it too. I was using a lot of German stuff, but like I had a Gebirgsjäger rucksack, I had a Gebirgsjäger Windjacke, I had some Leverkusen, and of course German boots. But then I had other stuff which was civilian. So yeah, sorry, lots to go on.
Well, I don't know what more to add, basically.
Well, I'll say, maybe sometime we could even do an episode just about this kind of a concept, because it's like reenactment related, right? And one could argue that it is reenactment, even though it's not really like the same as what we do when we say, okay, we're portraying a German military unit at D-Day or something like that. But it's you're still using technology from the past. You're kind of, I think, because you're using this stuff, you wind up being sort of in the mindset of the past, thinking about what people thought about when they had to use these things, when they had to wear these things every day. And
Totally.
there's like some controversy about this. Some people will frown on this kind of thing, not necessarily like what you guys did, but stuff on a small scale, right? Like people who might want to put on their kit, maybe not even their whole kit, maybe just part of it, or maybe just go out there in the woods and use some of their gear. And it's like, well, that's not reenacting. That's not worthwhile. And although I agree that it's not reenacting, I think it can be worthwhile.
Do you want to bring up the concept of what we've been calling in the States experimental archaeology, where you're like practicing doing a thing or using kit in a certain way?
Well, I think I might have talked about this before. Experimental archaeology is how I describe my personal reenacting style.
Sure.
Where it's like, okay, I'm thinking about, here is the historical evidence that we have. And here are these tools that are correct to the time, props, everything from your uniform and the stuff that you wear to whatever else that you can bring. And then kind of how can we make this work? What does it feel like to try to use these objects wearing this clothing in this setting with these limitations that come from the historical documentation? And
Sure.
The reality, though, is that to do sort of experimental archaeology stuff, you really don't need to be in full kit, right? Like, for example, if I want to know how long it takes to boil water with an Esbit stove in sub-freezing temperatures, I don't need to put on my whole uniform to do that. I can just go out and do it. I could do it in my backyard. And obviously, reenactment to me isn't something that takes place in your backyard, but there are aspects of it that I think you can kind of do at home.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they should be looked down on. I mean, you're right. It's not reenactment, and it shouldn't be like, oh, this guy's a reenactor. This guy has cooked tons of period correct meals in his yard. But I still think that it's worthwhile, and that it's kind of another dimension of living history, sort of. And I think it can be worthwhile.
Sure. Lasse, did you want to talk more about our Svalbard trek, or sort of our shared adventures? Either you coming to the States or me over there with you guys. How you want to?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to talk about, really. But I suppose there's this Svalbard thing isn't like directly World War II related, so we can rather talk about that at a later time. But what was unique with the Svalbard trip was that you're basically going to an island that is just next to the North Pole, and it's an island that's the size of Belgium and Netherlands combined, but there's only like 1,200 people who lives there, along with polar bears.
Yeah, we were legally mandated to carry at least one firearm in our party, as well as a flare pistol to basically scare away, or if we absolutely had to, if like a polar bear was charging, shoot it for our own protection.
Yeah. You also have to carry a GPS emergency transmitter in case something does happen, because there's no cell phone reception or anything up there, and you're basically alone. On our 5-day trek, it was beautiful. Beautiful sights, everything. The belugas, as we woke up, that swam just off the shore. The polar fox. Like, there's plenty of small, tiny moments there that's just perfect. But on the 5-day hike, we only met one person ever, as from when we left Barentsburg to when we came to Longyearbyen. And there was a guy who were local to Longyearbyen who basically had a cabin, which was an old building. And he had just arrived to this cabin like 10 minutes earlier or something. And he offered us beer, and we had a beer with him. And he was talking about that time they had, what was it, 700 kilo male polar bear just outside.
Yeah, it had been breaking into cabins along the shoreline, and nicely rooting through them for food. So they tranquilized it, I think, from a helicopter. He told us.
Yeah, the governor did that, and then they airlifted it, and took it further away. But like that's the sort of environment there.
To have a reenactment where a polar bear plays the part of a Soviet tank.
I'd rather see the Soviet tank because that's just going to break down.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Polar bear, not so much.
No.
A hungry polar bear doesn't break down.
No.
I mean, eventually, if it's hungry enough.
Then you need to run a lot. Let's see who gets tired first, you, Chris, or the polar bear?
Well, I don't know. I've never actually been in Mortal Kombat with a polar bear. But I'm sure there'll come a time.
I hope so.
I mean, I'm really good at Tekken 5.
I mean, kind of on some level, my ultimate goal would be to live in a post-apocalyptic world where you're legally obligated to carry a firearm to deal with rampaging bears. Like that sounds like a great daily life thing for me.
You should go to Svalbard, Chris. It's like autumn-like weather in the summer.
Sounds delightful.
And then the winter, there's no sunlight.
That sounds great. I should go in there in the winter.
Yep. No sunlight for months.
Sounds like a dream come true for me.
Yeah.
At the time of recording this here, we're in kind of the middle of August, and it is, for everybody listening, super hot and humid, and we don't have any air conditioning here in my professional recording studio that I've created for us to do these podcasts. So it's very sweaty over here.
Two sweaty males.
Yeah, I'm sure it's nicer where you are, Lasse, in Norway.
I mean, the weather here is all over the place. Today we had a thunderstorm that lasted for 5 minutes. Then we had 4 hours of sun, and then another 5-minute long thunderstorm. And just a few weeks ago at the theater play, we had some of the warmest... it was basically the warmest week of the year, so it was like perfectly planned for the theater. But sitting inside a truck without air condition, it's the first time I've actually stepped outside to... it was at most like 35 degrees Celsius, which is, let me check, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. For us Norwegians, that is very warm.
That's about what it is here today.
Yeah, but when I'm in my regular car and I open the door and I go out to like 95 degrees Fahrenheit, it basically hits me like a polar bear.
It's like a wall.
Yeah.
It's like walking into a wall of heat.
But when I was sitting in the Chevrolet, without any air condition, with an engine heating up a little bit extra, and the window regulators did not work at the time, so I was basically in a goddamn oven. When I stepped out to 95 degrees, it was actually cool.
That's crazy, but I can relate to that. It's like that at my work to some extent. It's where I work is really hot, has no air conditioning, and sometimes when I go outside, even on a 90-degree day, it feels cool. But when you were doing the theater thing, were you wearing your wool?
Yeah, I was in full kit.
Wow.
Okay, so there's like kind of a trope about reenacting, right? With like public display events in the summertime, spectators will ask you, "Are you hot in that uniform?" And I, in the past, have actually had a sign that says, "Yes, we are hot in these uniforms," because it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm wearing a wool uniform. It's the summertime. This is wool. It's like a blanket. I'm sweltering. But some people say that because wool breathes, and also because it I don't know, something about its thermal or insulative properties or something that it's cool to wear wool in the summertime. What do you think about this lesson?
Well, living in a northern European climate where the winters are too cold for German winter gear and the summers are too warm for us. I mean, ever since childhood, we've been taught to wear wool, done a lot of mountain hikes and such, and wool does have the fantastic ability to breathe, and I do agree with that. I never find wool difficult to wear in the summer. I mean, it gets warm, yes, but it like it's kind of like it's self regulating. It never gets too warm in it. Wear some polyester shit and you'll basically boil, but you won't do that in wool, in my opinion. Often at work, when I do some heavy work outside, I usually wear wool trousers because they're sturdy and it breathes.
I have some insight into this in the sense that we did that hike last weekend, Chris, and you were wearing cotton pants. I was wearing wool pants. Would you say
Yeah, I
that?
was wearing jeans, just for the record here, so people know that I wasn't wearing some kind of like MC Hammer like printed cotton pants.
Okay, yeah, and I was wearing Berghosen
Yeah.
replicas made by Schuster. So differences here, but I wasn't sweating at all. I thought the material breathed quite well, and it was very durable because at times we were literally sliding down the side of a mountain into a void. So yeah.
Ben's right, actually. We hiked up a mountain in New Hampshire last weekend, and Ben was wearing wool pants, and it was a hot day, and I was wearing jeans, and I sweat so much. I soaked through my jeans; they became all salty from sweat, and also my jeans did get pretty badly damaged sliding down the mountain on my ass. Whereas Ben's pants held up, and he was more comfortable.
They
So
look basically new, like almost no nap came off in that entire sliding experience. The one thing I will say though is trousers, the period, they're baggy for a reason. Like it, it allows you to basically breathe inside. I think if it was well up against your skin, that would chafe,
sure.
and yeah. So if I was wearing, say, I don't know, cotton breeches or like an Africa core pants, I'm sure it would have been similar. But yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to
Um,
tropical areas like North Africa, wool kind of gets too warm. But for regular climates, wool is a perfect material.
Well, this is a little bit of a segue to like something that I think I've kind of written about before, talked about with other reenactors, which is the fact that the climate where you reenact is something that I think people should take into account when they choose the scenario. So, like um, here where I am near Boston, we're on around the same latitude as Rome. And when the Wehrmacht was in Rome, they issued, or on the Südfront in general, they issued tropical uniforms, and because the wool uniforms were deemed to be too warm. So it's probably not unreasonable to think that if the Wehrmacht had come to America, come to New England in the summertime, that they might have had tropical uniforms or something like that, some kind of warm weather uniform because of the heat. So when I do events in the summertime where I can choose what the scenario is, I try to choose scenarios that enable me to wear the HBT uniform, which was, of course, issued to almost every German soldier and which was widely used, but was not used in every theater, not used in every area necessarily. But there were areas and theaters where it was more commonly used, and so I try to do events with those kind of scenarios in the summertime because it's more comfortable, it's more doable. It's for me, it's like more livable.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, there's we often struggle with German winter gear not being good enough because they're. I mean, if you look at a greatcoat, for example, it's made for like Central European autumns and springs. And Central European autumns and springs are basically summertime in Norway. As soon as we get autumn and spring, the greatcoat is not functional anymore.
Well, it's funny you say that because you compare the thickness of the German greatcoat to, say, the Soviet greatcoat, and I would say the Soviet greatcoat, the material is double or triple the thickness.
Definitely thicker.
It's very thick. German greatcoat wool, you hold it up to the sunlight, depending on which reproduction you have, you can see sunlight through it. You can't do that with a Soviet greatcoat, or even like an American GI greatcoat. Those are thicker,
Very
actually.
heavy. Yeah. And I have a lot of original greatcoats in my collection, and they're not really any thicker or heavier than the more quality reproductions that are available.
Agree.
But then again, thick wool doesn't warm you as much as 3 thin layers of wool because it's the air between the layers that insulates.
Sure.
But I bet 3 thick layers of wool insulates better than 3 thin layers of wool.
Yeah.
But then try to move in it.
Yeah.
But we're talking about climates and stuff. It's funny when people talk about Stalingrad being like a very, very cold place and stuff, when Stalingrad is basically located very close to the Caucasus, which is a tropical area.
Yeah, I don't really... I heard some kind of like bizarre theory, and maybe some of our listeners have heard this, or maybe the person who described this to me was simply insane, but it was that like actually the temperature in the Battle of Stalingrad was warmer because of like all the fighting that went on, and like no snow actually fell in Stalingrad during the battle because of thermal updrafts that were caused by the battle that like changed weather and caused snow not to fall. I mean, like,
Chris, you've lost your mind.
I know. Look, I'm not saying that I necessarily believe that. I think Stalingrad is one of these things where like there are so many legends about it that like that almost like could be true. That is to say, you know what I mean? It's just like this bizarre, like half the stuff I feel like I read about Stalingrad, it seems like reality, our shared reality, ceased to exist, and instead like it was just like this like cataclysm that the world had never known, and like the Earth's crust split into parts, and like millions of people just vanished in a moment. You know what I mean? It's just like So
it's funny because actually I heard that Stalingrad was colder that year because it was like a colder winter. Maybe that's
that winter was actually one of the coldest winters in Europe.
Okay, thank you, Lasse.
So, I mean, it was cold in Stalingrad, but it was colder elsewhere in Russia because Stalingrad isn't necessarily a very cold place. I mean, in the wintertime, it does get cold, but I took the liberty to check the weather right now. It's the middle of the night, both here in Oslo, that is further north, and like it's night here, and it's night in Volgograd, as it's called now. In Volgograd right now, it's 24 degrees Celsius. That is 75 Fahrenheit.
That's hot.
In Oslo right now, it's 14 degrees Celsius, or 57 Fahrenheit.
It's kind of like a common reenactor trope in America where, you know, you've got that weather app on your phone where you can program in different places and it'll tell you the weather in different places, and you can put Volgograd in there. So then when it gets cold in the wintertime, you could be like, it's colder than it was in Stalingrad, you know? Like, what are some of the strategies that you use to stay warm in the wintertime in the harsh climate where you guys are within the constructs of, you know, the historical realities of what German soldiers actually had to deal with?
I mean, it's very hard because German winter equipment sucks a lot.
I mean, well, Lasse, you remember when we did that event, November 2017? We basically spent the day on a hillside that had recently been cleared of trees for a logging operation, but looked kind of cool because you had like stumps there and maybe artillery hit it. And so we basically dragged logs and stones up to this sort of vantage point where we had the machine gun set up, and we sort of lined the floor of that with pine boughs cut from the trees. And then we put blankets down, and then we dug like a little hole, and we made the purpose. We intentionally went out and bought coal prior to the event, which I remember was kind of a logistical nightmare, like driving around Oslo trying to find that. But we basically had a small coal fire at the bottom of this pit where the machine gun was, and as you said, it doesn't produce a glow like a firewood, and so it doesn't really attract, and the coals are glowing red, so it doesn't really attract it doesn't really attract attention or fire like, I don't know, say a firewood. And so we had that going, and then it was basically 2 men on, 2 men off in the MG position throughout the night, and we basically just sort of huddled together under blankets with this marginal amount of warmth coming from this fire, and that was really cool.
German winter manual from 1942. And basically, coal burns slowly. It burns warm. You put it in the bottom of a trench and cold air goes down. So your feet will basically turn to ice in 15 minutes if you don't have any heat down there. But if you do, you can sit on it in a trench for hours. And
Sounds great.
it has a very low glow to it, so it doesn't ruin your eyesight either.
Yeah, I remember that. It was a cool trick.
That sounds really cool. Sounds zony.
And I mean, there's quite a few tricks on staying warm during a winter event, but we could do a whole episode just on that.
Yeah, we should do that.
It's colder.
Yeah, I look forward to colder weather and thinking more about that and talking about it, certainly.
Anything else from the events that we did together, Lasso, that you want to go over? Or
You can tell the tale of the child partisans.
oh my god, that was really funny. So what happened was, we basically your unit does this cool thing where no matter how few guys you have, you do sentry duty throughout the night, and so we had this aforementioned machine gun nest basically overlooking the trail that goes up to where we were sleeping, and the machine gun nest was sort of out in front of our sleeping area, and then we had the field phone running back from the machine gun nest to the sleeping area, and if the sentries saw anything, they could basically call it in, and so sentries who were on duty. This was, by the way, November in Norway, so the sun goes down about
4 o'clock in the afternoon.
3, 4 in the afternoon. So it was around, I say 7:30. So it'd been dark for several hours, and we were just sort of back in the sort of camp, hanging out. Well, 2 of us were off on sentry duty, and the phone rang, and it was the sentries, and they said that they saw lights coming up the path.
Yeah, we have to say that it's proper field phones.
Yep. That actually functioned. And so yeah, they saw lights coming up the path, and when they challenged the unknown intruders, the intruders scattered into the forest and proceeded to start making animal noises. And so we thought this was very strange, and so a patrol was assembled, and it was me, Lassa, Nicholas, somebody else, and we went out to basically reinforce the machine gun nest. And so we're looking around the darkness, and we're looking around, and I was actually starting to get kind of creeped out because I didn't know who. I basically didn't know who we were looking for. I mean, in my mind at the time, I thought, these are some teenagers. They think that we're camping. They wanted to come mess with us. And now they're being stalked in the night by like Nazi zombies. This is like something out of Dead Snow, and I don't want to corner some like poor local kid who's scared and like gets smashed in the head with a rock because he thinks I'm a Nazi zombie. I'm looking, and it's can't find anything, and there's 6 of us searching, and all of a sudden, a little voice calls it through the dark in Norwegian, what I was later told translated to. You guys really suck at playing hide and seek. And so we go up this slope, and there's these 2 little girls in, like, I think it was like pink purple rain boots and pink rain jackets, and we quote unquote interrogated them. And the only information we could get of them was that if they had guns, they would kill us all, and that their little sister wasn't cool enough to come with them on this mission.
Yeah, that's right.
That was how that particular adventure ended, with the fearless child partisans captured. Yeah, so I can't I don't imagine they were much older than like 10 and 12, possibly younger, but I guess they were the children of the landowner, and they had heard that the reenactors were going to be coming several weeks before, and they had been planning this raid, and I really have to hand it to them for their bravery. Yeah.
Sounds like they were zonier than a lot of GI fought against in my time.
Oh, totally. That was like I don't think I've ever been stalked in the night by like an unknown. It's fun. And little sister wasn't cool enough to come with them, so
that's how it always is with little sisters. I feel like.
Yeah. So, oh man, that was funny. Yeah, that was a great event.
That's really cool. So, Lasse, I wanted to ask you just a little bit more since we were talking about that Belgium event. I mean, what is this? What is the deal for food? Is that something that comes with the registration fee for that event?
Yeah. The food is included in that.
So, what do you guys actually have to bring? You have to bring just your uniforms and stuff. What about weapons? You rent those, or you loan those borrow them from somebody?
There's an armor on spot that supplies the entire event, so we rent guns.
Cool.
So we basically bring ourselves, and our kit, and some snacks doesn't hurt either, because you just get your main meals.
That sounds awesome. It's funny you bring up meals, Chris. I was just thinking at Youngstown Stalingrad how there had been a typo when the site organizers ordered bread for the site, and so there were, instead of 100 loaves of bread for all the reenactors, there were 200 loaves of bread.
Twice as many loaves of bread, yeah.
And so, you always hear about soldiers starving at Stalingrad, but at this event, I actually remember seeing basically soldiers in the German and Soviet camps literally throwing bread into the fire as fuel because there was so much of it.
Yeah,
so,
it was
clerical.
I mean, it was like not their fault. Like to their credit, they got they had bread. They found a local source for bread that was very similar to the original Kommissbrot German military issued bread, and they even got the baker to put a number on each loaf representing the date, as was something that was done with German Army issued bread. So to get that was really cool. But of course, there was some kind of a mistake. They ordered too much, and instead of letting it go to waste, they issued it out. So you got a portion of bread with your meal that was roughly the size of a football field, and and for like a minute, the bread was like valuable as currency. Or like people were like, I'm going to take this home, and then it was just like, oh, you want to take bread? Here's like 15 loaves of bread. Like we were like awash in bread. Yeah, people were burning bread for warmth.
I'll never forget that.
That was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it could have been worse. I mean, at least they got twice as much and not half as much, right?
Yeah, true. So. Oh, that would have been zoning if they got half as much.
I'm not looking to starve at events. Like, frankly, there are certain limits for me for like authenticity. Like, I know what it is to be hungry. I've been hungry in my life. Now, I don't know how to starve to death, and I don't want to learn. And I also don't need to like experience hunger to know, you know what I mean? Like I've experienced hunger. I've never experienced starvation. I don't need to experience more hunger. I don't want to experience starvation. And so that to me is an area where I think it's cool if you get like limited amounts of food.
Sure.
I think having some level of hunger or excitement, anticipation when the food comes around, these things add to it to me.
Big time.
I definitely need to eat some food. And the other thing is that look, I mean, I am a 21st century American and I eat 50 cheeseburgers a day. And so what is for me normal amounts of food versus what that would be for a mid 20th century German person living in a poor country coming out of the Great Depression.
From history.
So it's like, it's tough, right? Because when I think like German soldiers had limited food by their standards, it was still, like limited food by our standards is like more than what their baseline was. So limited for them was like something that for me would cause maybe a lot of suffering.
But I mean, you hear like Europeans who were like civilians and soldiers in World War II from Europe talking about just how well fed Americans were when they came over there. So yeah, it's different.
And that's even like those Americans had grown up like eating dandelion greens and regular like elbow macaroni and cans of beans as meals.
Sure.
Which to me, I would rather die than eat something like a can of beans, because I need to eat I'll eat like a pizza. I roll up a pizza, eat it like a burrito.
Oh, I just had to bring this up. Well, I did a couple of events last summer in which sort of marching, and one of those was the aforementioned trek we did, Lhasa, which was sort of a quasi reenactment in which you carry your food with you. And an interesting thing that I noted then was you want the weight on your backpack on your pack to decrease because you're carrying less, but that's also bad because you need enough food to get you through. Like you brought cans of Norwegian Army issue military beef, which were from basically a cow that had died 2 years before I was born. But of course, you did say I think you'd had such cans from the 60s and 70s, and it tasted fine, and we opened them and we cooked them up, and I was starving and it tasted fine. So yeah, it was an interesting experience for sure.
Yeah, it's a previous generation of German of the Norwegian army rations. I've been talking about them, how similar they are to the iron rations of the German army. But basically, they don't have an expiry date, and the ones from the 50s taste just the same as the ones from the late 90s. Wow. Ours were from 1994.
That's really wild, dude. That's really wild.
Crazy.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. Anything else you want to cover?
Well, Ben, since we have you here, I mean, look, you've gotten to do a bunch of events in recent times in Europe. You went to school in Spain, you got to do some events, and then you got to spend a summer in Europe and do some events. So, what's kind of your take on some differences between? And I'm sure that like reenacting is different in different areas of America. So
absolutely.
I'm sure reenactment is different in different parts of Europe too. But
well, it's interesting. So I did 2 events in Spain. One in 2016, one in 2017. And it was very cool, but it was really interesting being reenacting World War II in a country that had been neutral during the war. I just remember I've never seen more like sort of ceremony and commemoration for the fallen of both sides, and it was very respectfully done. But like as somebody who's used to ceremony at events as an American, it was like almost it was maybe it was just a particular event, but it was more commemoration than I'm used to at an American event. And it was also interesting because we were basically sort of reenacting like Normandy and Holland in a landscape that looked befitting of a spaghetti western. But it was pretty cool. A lot of the I mean, I have to say a lot of the Spanish impressions, especially the Allied impressions, were very impressive. And so kudos to Spanish reenacting. So I also did a couple of events in Switzerland, both of which were kind of different animals. One of which we were portraying SS Karstwehr during Operation Anna Maria in 1944, and we basically climbed up the slope of one of the Lesser Swiss Alps, and it it was a fantastic event. We got our water from mountain streams, and it was a wonderful experience. And then I did another event there with the sort of Swiss branch of SR195, where we were cooking some food and we dug this awesome foxhole, which was a cool activity on the slide on a sort of slope. And I remember actually one time we looked up and a Ju-52 flew over. It was part of that airline that operates them out of Switzerland. So that was a really cool sort of zony moment, seeing that trimotor go over. And then of course,
That's awesome.
Yeah, and of course I did 2 events with you, one of which we already talked about last summer in Oslo, where we were it was a time of year in Oslo. For people who haven't been to sort of Scandinavia in the summer, it's above the Arctic Circle. The sun doesn't set for a certain period of time, but below the Arctic Circle, it never truly gets dark. So we actually marched through the night in this sort of eerie perpetual twilight to get to this area where we could camp. Then we basically sort of crashed. And of course, I'll also say I did War and Peace last summer in the UK, which I would actually call more of a convention that happens to feature reenactors. I'm happy to say that I'm friends with some of the UK's finest, and definitely do some good events. But War and Peace struck me as more of a hangout. I would say, well, in Spain, there's a bit of a language barrier, to my shame, and make fun of me for it. I never really picked up the Spanish language, so my ability to converse with Spanish reenactors was a bit limited.
You lived there for 12 years, never learned to say a single word.
So, Senor Cerveza?
You're just saying words. Yeah, a beer. Great.
Yeah.
Very sophisticated there,
Yeah.
Ben.
Switzerland, I was very impressed with, although it was kind of the nature of reenacting in Switzerland was pretty small scale. Norway, very well organized, not a lot of units up there, but there seemed to be a lot of cohesion and momentum in Unilasa. And then the UK, I would say very research-based, very sort of kit detail oriented. So job well done all around. Yeah, so that's just sort of my take on the countries in Europe that I've had the pleasure of reenacting in, and it was a lot of fun. I hope that I can see a lot of your smiling faces again and soon. So yeah.
Well, you should fly over.
Move to Norway.
Daily reminder.
You told me you'd remind me to do that.
Lasse, you have to come here again next.
You need to come to Stalingrad, Lasse.
Yeah, we'll see about Ohio 2020.
You can take a boat. Take the truck. Drive.
Maybe the Chevy want to go home.
I think we're up against our time limit here, Lasse. But you got any final thoughts on this? This was like, as I'm sure our audience realizes, we didn't actually prepare anything for this. So it was a very easy podcast to record, but I think we touched on some interesting subjects.
Sure. It's been my pleasure to be here. I can possibly the pleasure of starring again in the future, and yeah.
Yeah, we need to do some solo episodes with you, Ben. Talk about your globetrotting, reenacting.
I'd like that a lot. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
All right, guys. I hope you have a nice rest of your evening, and to you and everyone in the field.
See you in the field.